Yeah, g'day and welcome back to my shop. Now I'm doing a bit of a shop cleanup. Now my current trip is trying to improve the layout of the shop a bit, and this Clarkson tool and cutter grinder seems to be always in the way, so let's put it on wheels. Now my mate Luke down in Malta has got the same tool and cutter grinder as I do, and he already made a stand for his, whereas mine's been on my list for probably 2 years. Anyway, I'll do something kind of similar, I guess. Although I like Clarkson's nice curved castings and want to do something kind of curved as well. Now I've got a couple of casters left over, and these are N32s, so good for 100 kilos per wheel. Right, now normally I tend to launch into things like this with bugger all planning. Let's change that. Let's call it 460. Brilliant. Having a detailed plan makes me much more confident of success. Oh wait, the holes. That one looks like it's about 1 inch in. And the rear hole is, I'll call that 25.4 millimeters. See what the corner radius is. 2 inches. So if I want a strip of metal that kind of curves around the ends, like have welds here and here to a couple of straight bits, then I'm going to need 2 inch radius is a 4 inch diameter. Pi D, let's call pi 3, close enough, so you're looking at 12, but you're only talking a quarter of it because it's only one corner, so you're back to about 3 inches. And the length of this piece is going to be 354 minus 2 times 2 inches. Nice, plenty of thunder. So we're looking at about 400 millimeter piece of angle iron. Okay, I did the maths. It's 412. So I need 2 of them, one for the front and one for the back. Unfortunately, 412 millimeters doesn't fit in the throat of my bandsaw, so I thought that weather sounded kind of threatening.
When do you want to use it? Why did you make it hail?
Maybe it only hailed on her side of the house. Whoops, I forgot I left the thing in 4T mode. For the foot switch, it's better with 2T, isn't it? Still having problems learning to feed properly, and I should have backed off the power before I burnt that hole. That popping, I still don't have a good feel for where the foot pedal drops off the power ramp into shutdown mode. That came out reasonably even. I think I'll pull the whole grinder apart, which is pretty easy. You know, I'm always pleasantly surprised if I can find 2 fasteners on this machine which use the same wrench. Because those 3 were metric. So this is the one holding the head casting on, whereas this one is the one that was holding the top on. So that's an M12 nut. I guess at some stage somebody rethreaded those 3, because the machine would have originally all been Whitworth or something similar. So time to break out the aircraft toolbox. Probably have to make one of these at some stage, whatever the size that is. Nice casting. Even with all that removed, this casting's still bloody heavy. Complete with cobwebs. When a spider lives in here, I wonder what it eats. So the cutting capacity is exactly 1 blade width less than I need, because I need to cut on this side of that line. Right, it's time to start tacking this together. How am I going to get a good support for my arm here? Oh, that's better. Well, that's probably a little tighter than I was hoping for, but still. Can I get it back on? At this stage it still goes on. I'll weld out the bottom, try again, see if I need to move these edges out a bit. So this is the welding helmet I've been using for the last couple of years. It's got a pretty typical sized lens inside it, maybe 1.5 inches, sort of 40mm high. It is self-darkening. So this here's the view through the Walter helmet, strong green tinge. But when our captain offered me a helmet as well, I figured I'd try something newer. So this has got a much larger field of view. Vision areas like 9x10. This here's the view through the arc captain. It's much clearer. And this old helmet's got a very sort of typical band clamping around the head with a bit of height adjustment on top of it. It's kind of fine. It's typical. The arc captain is similar, except it separates the loop over the top into 2 different loops. The forehead and back of the neck loops have got an angle to them. You can see this. This needs to ride quite low, sort of the bottom of the cranium. But once you've got it there, it's really quite comfortable. It then works fine with glasses. Very happy with it. To try and get decent welding photos, I've just been using like a normal lens, and I have it open before I strike the arc, and then I stop, put a neutral density filter on it, change the camera's exposure to close down the aperture a whole bunch, and then start again with taking a shot. Now unfortunately I've picked up a bunch of weld splatter when I was using the MIG welder onto my ND filter, which is not ideal, but the main thing is it's just a pain in the ass to start, stop, start, stop. So what I've done, I've now bought a spare lens for a welding helmet, and I think what I'll do is just tape that in a sort of bodged up way to the front of this lens, and maybe I can get some decent welding footage that way. Whoops, burned a bit of a hole at the end there, didn't I? I wonder if I can white balance out that green. Oh, that's cool, it gets rid of most of it. I have to fill up that hole before I move on. So I've turned down my max amperage a bit, down to 105 amps, but really I need to learn to control that foot switch better. Any advice on how to TIG up holes is appreciated. Well, that's pretty fugly, but that's what grinders are for. This time I need to remember my song in my head and remember my rhythm. Kind of wandered off course there a bit. Right, this last weld's got quite a gap in it. Probably over 1 millimeter. Is this something you do with TIG? Just lay in a piece of wire like this? I'll give it a go. Apart from the crater at the end, I'm not too unhappy with that. In my last video, I was having some difficulty getting my MIG welder set up to work properly, and I speculated that its wire feed was defective because it wouldn't feed faster than 2 meters per minute. A few of you pointed out, and the manufacturer confirmed, that MIG welders normally inhibit their wire speed if you don't have an arc struck. When Alex, who bought me this welder, contacted the manufacturer, they pointed out there is a button at the very top of the wire chamber which will override that inhibit. I hadn't noticed that in there before. First up, let's set it down to its minimum wire speed, which is what, 2 meters, I guess? Okay, so that was much faster than the set 2 meters. So that's 11.5 meters per minute. So I'm guessing that high speed just goes right to full speed and not to the set speed of the knob. So I guess the only accurate way to measure the feed speed would be measure the diameter on the wire spool, put a mark, let it run for 6 seconds, and then calculate it off that radius. Since the dial says it maxes out at 13 meters and the high speed mode gives 11.5, I think I'll just trust that. I watched a couple of basic MIG welding technique videos from Welding Tips and Tricks, and he did point out that using pure CO2 like this does make for a very narrow sweet spot in the settings. So I'm guessing I just didn't stick with it long enough to find the sweet spot setting to have my welds melt in properly. Right, so first up, here's 6 meters a minute and 19 and a bit volts. That seems a very proud weld, so I'll give it some more voltage. I'll just keep dialing up voltage and see what happens. It seems a little better. Crank it up a bit more. 21.5. Oh yeah, that's looking better. It does give the impression that it's burning into the base metal a bit more. I'll just crank it, which is 24 volts, and see what that does. That seems extremely splattery. So I'll dial that back a bit. A lot of splatter. Still seems kind of a little bit too proud to me. Let's just dial up the wire speed at that setting. So that's now going up to 7 meters. .24 volts seems probably the best I've done. I'll just give it another meter of speed, take it up to about 8. Having no experience whatsoever of how to MIG properly, I'm kind of at a loss here as to, is this normal? This may be a totally normal sort of weld speed there. Yeah, so that's 7 meters of wire and 24 volts, which is max voltage. I'll go up a little bit more on wire speed. This is going to be 10 meters, 24 volts. That's ugly. That was definitely worse. I am out of gas. Okay, you can clearly see the point where we ran out of gas because that became horribly porous and that looked terrible. That was all gasless. But before that, I'm thinking that this weld, which was 7 meters and 24 volts, and this one, which was I also think 7 meters and I think 22 volts, are probably the best looking welds. So once I get some more carbon dioxide, I'll try and do some more practice with those settings. Right, next I'm going to need some sort of outrigger arms to mount these casters onto. I also want to do something kind of swoopy and round, so what size diameter am I going to need? So about 80, I guess. So I better go through my stock and see if I can find something that'll work as a mandrel. Oh, that'll do it. Nice having a vise big enough to do this. This is where I'm going to need like 3 hands or 2 hands and a knee or something, isn't it? Oh, now I'm hitting the other end. Maybe a better idea would be do it vertically. But not really. Maybe this will work. A lot of leverage there. But hey, let's remember there are a few jobs that are beyond the capabilities of tape. Kind of a bummer thing about copper jaws, you can't add magnetic jaws to them. That works nicely, at least in my imagination that's perfect. It's nice to have 2 vices and have to change the setup. Okay, they're pretty close to the same size, not perfect, but good enough for this particular task. Now the idea is that that's going to sit down in there a bit, but it's too deep, and I'm going to need 4 of them. So if it's too deep and I need 4 of them, so these rings, their only real job is just a bit of strengthening on those corners and to give a more rounded edge so when I bump my toes against them I don't cut myself. You'll see. I should be able to get all 4 out of here. Well, quite a bit of welding later, we get these. That's probably the best one I did. A few little lumps that I'm going to need to knock down, but otherwise it seems reasonable. Right, the next and last piece of this puzzle is to mount this kind of puck thing, which the caster's on, to the frame. Now it needs to be low enough down that it doesn't add a huge amount of height to the whole build-up. Do need to get the machine high enough off the ground that it doesn't belly on my uneven floor. It needs to be far enough out that the casters can rotate through 360. And I kind of want to stick with the sort of curvy shape of the whole thing. So whether I do an inward facing curve like that or a circular part, either way I'm going to need some round stock, and I found this piece in my scraps. It's a nice thick-walled steel tube. However, it's not long enough to get all 4 pieces out of. I do need kind of a diagonal sort of style of structure there. So I reckon I can cut it in half and then cut the remaining parts sort of diagonally across. Get a standoff out of each diagonal. Here you can see the progress of making on my attachment brackets. Now this first one, I chopped it in half because I didn't know whether I wanted to go this way, but I decided that sucked. So I'm going to have to stick that back together. Quick whiz with the metal reassembler. Once I had a sort of an idea of how that would work, the second one's a lot more accurate, and that's what I'll duplicate on the last 2. Well, you wouldn't want me to weld your pipes in your nuclear power station, but it shouldn't fall apart. Now I know it's cheating to go over your welds a second time. It makes my ones look a lot better. I find one issue with making one-off parts like this is I normally don't have much in the way of a plan when I start, and therefore sort of designs change and evolve as you go along, and you end up with bits like this where you got a big gap and then it takes ages to make little fillers and takes longer to weld, but hey, what the hell. I also forget with TIG that I'm supposed to keep the torch pointing at the work until it cools off. Okay, so I've now got 3 cup holders installed, and now to find the height of the last one, put it up on 4 blocks. Right, weld that there. If you melt metal, then let it cool, it shrinks. So the question is, will this still fit? Still does. Right, now I need to pick up where I drill those 3 holes. This is not exactly a strong thread, but then again, This is such a good grip on the base. There's not going to be a hell of a lot of load on these bolts. Right, I just had to do a wee bit of grinding there to make sure that each of these casters can get all around like that. Might be a wee bit more interference there. Anyway, let's do a trial fit up and see what it's like. That should work. Right, the first task is let's see if I can make up a paint which sort of matches. Well, that's probably a decent shot for a first coat. Mailtime. I've got some short patch cables. Some wall mount cover plates for my keystones for my network. And the rest of the casters I need to finish this project. Brilliant. Okay, nice warm day here, so that paint's dried well. But I noticed a couple of issues while it was hanging up. When I ground away under here to make clearance for the casters, I didn't deburr it. So I need to deburr that before the second coat of paint. The second issue, I was kind of playing around with these casters and I realized that if you try and lock it, this bit goes up quite a long way. And that's not going to work because I put that lip in the way. So I guess I'm going to have to make up some sort of a spacer or something. Probably going to have to lift these up probably 6mm or so. I'll do that when I get back from my business trip. And the third issue is just the colour. It's way too light. I guess the bluishness doesn't look too bad. It's more just too light, I guess. So I'll add a bit more black into the final coat. Right, well that paint's now had a good week to dry because I was out on a business trip. On my way back I had a stopover in Istanbul, and on approach we flew across like the southern entrance to the Bosphorus and then hung a right up to Istanbul airport. Got this amazing view over the whole city, looked fantastic. Right, so this is just some 6mm plate and that's what's going to be used for the spacers to pack those up a bit. So I just quickly welded those together to make it easier to drill all the holes. Right, now I can separate them. Right, let's get this assembled and get the whole thing back upright again. Right, let's take this thing for a test drive. Well, it certainly feels nice and smooth, nice and sturdy. And locked. It wiggles a little bit, but not too bad. So I'm pretty happy with that. Ah, yeah, this is brilliant. Just push it right out of the way when I'm not using it. So all in all, I see this being a big improvement, and I'm glad that I did it. Probably shouldn't have waited so many years to actually finally do this job. Cool, always a good feeling to remove another thing off the list. So after all that mucking around, was there any actual advantage in doing the kind of rounded, curly sort of style? Nah, absolutely not. Complete waste of time. But I kind of like it. Thanks a lot for watching.